Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the October edition of the Southeast Climate Monthly Webinar, where we talk about the climate and special topics pertaining to the Southeast region. I am Sandra Rayne, the Regional Climatologist from the Southeast Regional Climate Center, and I will be giving a climate overview for the month of September, as well as a tropical update. We are fortunate today to have a few guest speakers, Todd Hamill from the Southeast River Forecast Center, who will provide a water resources overview, Pam Knox from the University of Georgia, who will give an agricultural impact update, and Chip Konrad from the Southeast Regional Climate Center, who will provide a fall foliage outlook. We thank them all for joining us. Just a reminder before we begin to type your questions in the question box at any time, and they will be answered at the end. Also, please fill out the survey to help us with future webinars, and a recap email with a link to this recording will be sent out in the next day or two. All right, let's begin with September. Temperatures were near average across much of the Southeast for September. Indeed, monthly mean temperatures were within 2 degrees of average for over 90% of the 210 long-term reporting stations. There were only 2 stations that observed or tied their warmest September on record: Stuart, Florida, which had its warmest September, and Plant City, Florida, which tied 2019 for its warmest September on record. Although maximum daily temperatures were near average, high rates of evaporation and persistent influx of tropical moisture suppressed nighttime cooling for the minimum temperatures for the month, resulting in an above average minimum temperatures, especially in Florida. Key West and Miami observed minimum temperatures above 70 degrees for the entire month. Across Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, monthly mean temperatures were slightly above average. Bonito, Puerto Rico did observe its 5th warmest September on record, and Coloso, Puerto Rico observed its 7th warmest September. Precipitation across the region was also near average for the month. The driest locations were found across central Alabama and southern Georgia and parts of eastern Florida, whereas the wettest locations were across the Florida Panhandle. Tuscaloosa, Alabama only received 0.85 inches of rain, which was over 2 inches below normal. However, Pensacola, Florida reported 18.5 inches of rain, which was more than 12 inches above normal, making this their 3rd wettest September on record. Monthly precipitation across Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands was slightly below normal. And really, no extremes as far as precipitation were reported. There were 116 reports of severe weather across the Southeast for September, which is slightly more than the average of 98 for the month. This includes hen egg-sized hail that occurred in Wake County, North Carolina on September 25th, damaging straight-line winds associated with severe thunderstorms on September 3rd in the Washington, D.C. area, and an EF1 tornado in Ware County, Georgia, that had winds of 110 miles per hour on September 16th. This tornado lofted and displaced gravestones along its damage path, as well as damage to the church roof. However, no one was injured. Now on to our very active tropical season. The 2020 Atlantic season has had 25 named storms so far, which is the second only to 2005. 22 of the 25 storms have had their earliest formation date on record. September had 10 named storms, which is the most on record for the month. For a brief time on September 14th, the Atlantic had 5 active tropical cyclones. On September 18th, we transitioned into using the Greek alphabet for names, which is the second time since 2005. We've made it through Delta, and next up is Epsilon. Delta became the 10th tropical cyclone to make landfall in the United States, which is the most on record. Even though we are now past the peak of hurricane season, we still have an active amount of time left. Hurricane season officially ends November 30th, although it is possible for tropical activity to continue past November 30th, like it did in 2005. Some notable storms: Hurricane Sally, which made landfall on September 16th near Gulf Shores, Alabama, as a Category 2 hurricane with sustained winds of 105 miles per hour. Fort Morgan, Alabama reported a wind gust of 121 miles per hour. Pensacola, Florida received over 24 inches of rain, and storm surge flooding reached 5.6 feet, which was the third highest storm surge ever reported for Pensacola. Unfortunately, 8 fatalities were observed with this storm, including a 45-year-old female kayaker missing at the height of the storm. Tropical storm Beta formed in the Gulf of Mexico and made landfall on September 22nd on the Matagorda Peninsula south of Houston, Texas. It caused extreme flooding in Houston to the streets and the freeways. Our most recent storm, Hurricane Delta, made 2 landfalls. The first in Mexico as a Category 2 storm on October 7th, and the second near Creole, Louisiana on October 9th, also as a Category 2 storm with sustained winds of 100 miles per hour. Unfortunately, Delta made landfall about 12 miles east of Cameron, Louisiana, which was where Hurricane Laura made landfall on August 27. So many people were still trying to recover from Hurricane Laura when Delta hit. There were widespread power outages, flooding, and wind damage that occurred with Delta. Currently, the remnants of Delta are moving up the eastern seaboard, and the National Hurricane Center is watching an area in the southern Atlantic. Typical formation, however, is a little closer to the mainland of the United States for October, where we usually have about 1 to 2 named storms, and one of those becoming a hurricane. Moving on to the ENSO update, the Climate Prediction Center has put out a La Niña advisory as of October 8th, with an 85% chance of La Niña continuing through the winter and a 60% chance of it continuing into spring. So La Niña is here, and several models suggest the likelihood of it becoming a moderate La Niña during November through January. The latest drought monitor shows extreme drought in the western United States, but no drought over the southeast. Looking at what happened over the month of September, the southeast remained drought-free, as did Puerto Rico, for the entire month. However, we did see some small pockets of abnormally dry conditions here and there. The autumn outlook suggests that the southeast will remain drought-free through December. The Climate Prediction Center has a 40% probability of the southeast seeing above average temperatures for October, November, and December, as well as a 33% chance of below average precipitation for Alabama and western Georgia, but an equal chance of above average or below average precipitation for the rest of the southeast. Although it has been rather warm and wet the past couple of days, looking ahead, we are likely to see a cool down and some drier conditions. So in summary, September temperatures were near average, with above average minimum temperatures, especially for Florida. September precipitation was also near average. The Caribbean had slightly above average temperatures and slightly below average precipitation. Some notable storms include Hurricane Sally and Delta and Tropical Storm Beta, as well as hen egg-sized hail in Wake County, North Carolina, straight line winds in Washington, D.C., and an EF1 tornado in Ware County, Georgia. There were many records broken this tropical season, and it continues to be active. La Niña is here and expected to continue. However, we don't anticipate any drought for the southeast or Puerto Rico. A cool down will be coming with hopefully drier conditions. And autumn should continue to be warm, with Alabama seeing a drier autumn, as well as the rest of the southeast could be wet or dry. And the southeast should remain drought-free. All right, let's move on to Todd with our water resources update.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start off with our update, and we usually look back at the 28-day average stream flow. And as you can see, over most of the southeast, we are seeing either normal or above normal stream flows over the last 28 days. Now, this is the time of year as we go from one water year to the next, because we end the water year on September 30th. As USGS does their records and so forth for that. And so the reason they do it that time of year is this is typically our driest time of year. And you can see that on the right-hand side of the screen, where it shows each of the different years and where we were. At this time last year, we were extraordinarily dry. We had been very hot and very dry, and almost was near a record as we got into October, and almost at this time of year. Quite the opposite this year, where we've been very wet and we've remained wet. We did start to get into the normal categories. We got into late summer, but September has continued to bring wet conditions, and our stream flows have stayed above normal for a good chunk of September and into October, and looks to stay that way for at least a little while. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. And so one of the reasons that we are above normal is because for this time of year, tropical weather is a part of our climatology. If we don't get tropical storms or tropical things into the southeast, we tend to stay very dry. In this case, and we would have continued to stay dry, we're starting to dry out, as you saw before, in August and early September, and then Hurricane Sally came in. And you can see as mentioned before, all the rainfall from Hurricane Sally, it did affect a lot of the rivers in the southeast, especially along the Gulf Coast in Florida, where we had some major river flooding, and then all through a good chunk of the southeast in Georgia, South Carolina, and even up into Virginia and North Carolina. We had some minor flooding in those areas. So it did bring a lot of water to the area and put stream flows above normal for this time of year. So go ahead and go on to the next slide. And so right now, with our tropical storm Delta that just came through, you can see this was as of yesterday, and we had stripes of rain. The storm, the strongest part of the storm, stayed to our west, as the other one did, as Sally did. But it was much stronger as it came through and brought a lot more. Sally did. This one was weaker as it came through and came through very slow. And we ended up with some stripes of rain through parts of Georgia and into South Carolina, and then even up a little bit into the Carolinas and Virginia. So this was as of yesterday, but this was a quick shot of rain. So things went up very quickly and are equally going down very quickly. So so a lot of these, even today, we're not showing as much flooding today as we did yesterday. So things should be moving downstream. Again, we continue to get these rains during a typically dry time of year, and so we stay above normal, and it looks like we'll stay above normal. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So this is the Southeast River Forecast Center flood climatology. And we do this so we kind of have a feel on a normal year what we would expect. And so we're at week 42 in this cycle. And you can see that as we start to get into this middle of October through November, this is when we start to get to our quiet time of year where we don't have quite as much flooding. We don't typically see that much flooding. As hurricane season starts to wind down, and it's before our winter recharge season. So we're kind of in between flooding seasons in the Southeast at this time, and we're moving into that time. So we're expecting, unless we get another tropical system move into the area or develop in the area, that we should have a quieter last half of October, and then as we go into a quieter early November. And so we'll see how that goes, but it does look like that's the case. And then we look for the winter. We look to the winter for our next chance of flooding and the recharge season of the Southeast. So let's go ahead and go to our next slide and our expectations. So for October, we have started off wet, and because of that, even though we do look to be drying out over the next week or two, we do look at the possibility, because we've already been wet and our stream flows are already high, that it won't take much for us to remain above normal. So we will keep our forecast for October as above normal, and that would go into the early November, but that's the only reason. Right now, it does look like we're drying out some and that we're getting a little break from the rainfall. But there is still the potential, and again, a lot of it's because we are already wet. And it doesn't take much for us to be above normal in the month of October, simply because, again, this is supposed to be a dry time of year. So our next slide goes into a little further out, and that's November through December. And if we can almost extend this out into January, February, March. As was mentioned, La Niña becomes very prominent and keeps a lot of the Southeast dry during that time. During a typical La Niña, most of the Southeast, especially down in Florida, tends to be much drier during that time. And so, you know, we do get rain fairly close to us, because there's typically above normal rain in the Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley, and it can creep a little further south. So it does, the tops of our basins sometimes will get a little bit of wetness during a La Niña year, but the rest of the Southeast tends to be very, very dry. However, because we've gone into the winter season wet, is what it looks like right now, we're looking at near normal stream flows just because we're starting off in a good spot. And even below normal rainfall and coming out of a wet fall will keep us in good shape as we go through the rest of the winter. And then we'll have to look at spring when we get a little bit closer to that. But for now, it looks like we're going to be near normal for November and December. So let's go ahead and go to our final slide. Southeast stream flows will remain above normal across the Southeast after Hurricane Sally and Delta. And the stream flow forecast is for above normal for October, and I explained that. And then again, kind of backing off some as we get into November and December, and getting to more normal type stream flows for that time. And that is it for me, I believe.
All right, well, let me jump right in here with the agricultural impacts. I'm Pam Knox. I'm the director of the UGA Weather Network. And go on to the next slide. This is a little bit different map than what Sandra showed earlier. This is from the last webinar to this webinar, and it shows the departure from normal temperature on the left. Shows for most of the Southeast, we've been cooler than usual, with the exception of the Florida Peninsula. And not surprising, that's also the cool area is also the area that had the most rain, so there are also more clouds, and the rain also helped keep temperatures down. So if you look on the right-hand map, the departure from normal precipitation, you can see the effects of Sally there in the Florida Panhandle, stretching off to the northeast, and then some rain also from some of those tropical systems that have affected Florida. I was driving through northern Georgia on Sunday and noticed how much standing water there was from Delta. And so it's, you know, they've gotten several inches of rain up there with the last storm, and they also got some from Sally. So for since our last webinar, we had wetter and cooler than normal conditions except the Florida Peninsula. Go on. This is a couple of products that are more geared for agriculture. On the left-hand side is an experimental project from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center on flash drought, which is a short-term agricultural drought. And on the right is the Lawn and Garden Moisture Index from the University of Alabama at Huntsville, which shows really the short-term water deficits. You can see there that it's very wet through Alabama, northern Georgia, and then on into the Carolinas. But in South Georgia and stretching into South Carolina is a really quite dry area. Those areas really didn't get a lot of rain out of either of the two tropical systems. I know here at my house here in Athens, I got less than an inch out of this last storm. So most of it went just to the west of us, and they had a lot of flood warnings in Atlanta from that and so on. So parts of the state are actually fairly dry, and I think that's leading to that little spot of the drought forecast tendency in east central and south central Georgia. This time of year is pretty hard to get a flash drought because those usually are more likely to happen when the temperatures are really warm, although it's supposed to get in the 80s here today, so we'll see. But it's something to keep in mind. Most farmers don't mind it being dry this time of year because they're trying to get their crops in, and it's easier if they're not getting bogged down in the fields. Go on to the next slide. There are some of the impacts of the recent conditions on agriculture. Corn, for most parts of the southern part of the Southeast, is already harvested. Northern regions such as northern Georgia, the wet fields have caused some problems because they can't get their machinery in to do the harvesting, and the winds have blown some of the stalks down as well, so that makes it a little harder to harvest. Cotton is proceeding nicely. A lot of it's being defoliated. Once it's defoliated, they take the leaves off, and then it's got to dry a little bit. Really needs warm and sunny conditions for it to dry down so they can really do a good harvest. And so it looks like the next few days with this high pressure over us, we're going to see a lot of defoliation, a lot of harvesting going on. They're already harvesting in southern Georgia and southern Alabama, and I think they're going to try to get a lot done. They're all thinking, I think, a little worried about Hurricane Michael a couple of years ago, which hit right before harvest, and a lot of people lost nearly their entire crop. So even though the tropics are pretty quiet now, people are sensitive to that, and they're trying to get things in as quickly as they can. Peanut harvest is underway. It's another crop that needs some dry conditions. They take the peanut plants and they invert them, which means basically they take the peanuts and they put them on top, and then they dry out for a bit, and then are harvested when the moisture levels get down. So some of them are inverted. Of course, you don't want it to rain on them once they're inverted because then they get wet and it takes a while to dry down as much. Early pecan harvest is doing really well. I hear they're ahead of usual this year, and some of the more intermediate varieties are now just about ready to harvest. They've been very concerned about these tropical storms because of the winds. The trees have so many nuts on that if you get a significant amount of wind, it breaks the limbs of the trees. But the farmers overall have been very happy. It's going to be one of the biggest harvests since they had problems from Hurricane Irma a few years ago and then Hurricane Michael 2 years ago. On the next slide, I want to talk just a little bit about Sally, one of the two hurricanes that affected us here in the Southeast. You might remember that Sally was moving only about 3 miles an hour when it came on shore. And so part of that is that it dropped a lot of rain over the area, up to 20 inches in some places. And of course, they were already pretty wet, so that caused a lot of problems down there. Also, having those winds blow at hurricane force for hour after hour flattened a lot of cotton or blew it away off the plants and flattened other crops like corn and soybeans. Farther west, sugarcane, which is not as big a crop in that part of Florida, but certainly in Louisiana as a crop. One of the things that some of the farmers noted was that with all those winds, they had a lot of debris in the fields, and that's a real problem for running equipment because it picks up that debris and it clogs the machine, and they have to stop and fish it out. And so that made it hard. It slowed down the harvest a little bit. On the next slide, since Delta just happened, we don't have a lot of estimates of what affected, what impacts it has had yet. But, you know, people that are harvesting cotton and peanuts are certainly at a vulnerable time. And so I'm sure that there were some losses from that. The high winds close to the center, which is really just to the west of the Southeast, certainly have flattened other crops, and it makes it hard to harvest things. So that's something that they're watching. The winds in most of the southeast weren't that strong, so I don't think that was as much a problem as the rains were. So I'll be waiting to see what happens with impacts from Delta on agriculture as they publish it in the next couple weeks. Go on. We still have a lot of the harvest to go, and we're not out of the tropical season yet, so people are going to watch that carefully. The humidity has been so high this year that they're having terrible problems with white mold on peanuts, other fungal diseases on vegetables. This time of year, they're planting a lot of vegetables, and those are getting a lot of downy, powdery mildew and downy mildew. So that's a problem. Some of the strawberries that are being planted, they're going in and they're immediately getting a lot of problems with the fungal diseases and the mold. And so if they don't get a good establishment, then they're not going to produce a lot of fruit. So that's something that's a concern to the farmers. Late pecans are still not quite ready. If we get a storm that comes through, they could lose some of those pecans still at this point. And we'll continue to see some problems with peanuts, cotton seeds sprouting. The cotton gets wet, the seeds that are inside those bowls will actually start to sprout. And that means the quality goes way down. They can't sell it for as much. Go on. So my summary for what ag impacts we've seen, the corn is mostly harvested, but northern corn is still vulnerable to wind and rain. Humidity is still causing a lot of problems with fungal diseases. It's been a huge thing this year. Some of the producers are saying this is the worst they can remember it. And that's helping to keep those minimum temperatures that Sandra talked about up at night. Hurricanes Sally and Delta brought rain. That was the major impact for us, but it did cause damage to the crops, especially the ones right along their paths from the really heavy rain and the wind. And we still have a month and a half to go in the official tropical season. So now until everything is harvested, which is going to be a while, there's still some potential for continued losses from any tropical storms that we might have. So that's it for my report this time. I think we're passing it on to the Fall Foliage Outlook and Chip.
All right, thank you very much, Pam. My name is Chip Konrad. I'm the director of the NOAA Southeast Regional Climate Center. Next. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is tell you a bit about the fall foliage and what's going on now and maybe what we can expect here in the next couple of weeks. What you see here is a map showing the expected peak, where the peaks are occurring right now in terms of the foliage, basically where the colors are maximized. And if you look there in the northern parts of the southern region, particularly in the Appalachian Mountains, you see the darker colors. And so if you look at the scale there on the bottom right, you can see, according to this map, that there's a couple of areas, very small areas. This is a county, basically a county level map. There are some counties in which they show it's past the peak, a number of counties in the mountains where it's near the peak or right at the peak. And then we go to the lower elevations in the Carolinas and Georgia and so forth, and you see that we have some color. This is, of course, a very generalized map, and it's from a model that they don't share much about the details of the model, but my sense is it's a model that was computed from a couple of weeks ago. And so it's not really accounting for the recent rains that we've had, and certainly not accounting for the weather that we're going to be expecting here in the next few weeks. The other thing to mention is it's a county level map, and there's a lot of local variation in foliage in terms of where it's, where the coloration and so forth, and just kind of pointing out that obviously in the higher ridges, mountaintops, you're going to see an earlier peak. And that's also the case, and it's very interesting in some of the valley bottoms, what we think of as frost hollows, where it can get really chilly at night, where you get the frosts occurring earlier in the fall compared to other areas. And then typically a later peak kind of on the lower parts of the ridges of mountains and also on hilltops. So this is what it's sort of said to look like right now. I think this is a little bit slightly ahead of things, what you see here. Go to the next slide. And so this shows the conditions that are expected in 2 weeks. And so if we kind of start off in the northern parts of the southeast, we see broad areas that are past the peak. And then you see sort of south of there, an area that's around the peak. Again, I think this is rather optimistic in terms of moving things forward, and I'll get into that here in just a second. Next. Okay, so this is a sort of a diagram that I put together that sort of tries to summarize some of the factors that play into the timing of the peak and fall color. And in here, I show basically sort of three conditions. The first of which is precipitation or lack thereof. And so basically, if we kind of look there, we got drought, persistent dryness, and persistent wetness. Basically, generally, the wetter it is, the later, all other factors equal, the later you would expect the peak to be. And as some of you probably know, the wetter it is, typically the warmer it is as well. But by far, though, of course, the biggest factor in determining when the peak is temperature. And so when temperatures are warmer than normal, we would expect a somewhat later peak. And then sort of the third factor has to do with the occurrence of heavy rain, which in a lot of areas we've had that here lately, and also strong wind episodes. So once the leaves have really started to turn, strong winds or rain can start to knock the leaves off. And obviously, as the leaves are beginning to lose their color, so once they maximize color and they begin to lose it, they very easily fall off. But before that, heavy rain or strong winds can knock them off. But if we kind of look at all of these sort of things together, basically persistent wetness would make for a later peak, especially warmer than normal temperatures. And then if you have long periods of calm weather without much wind, and that in the southeast would mean that our jet stream, our storm track as well to the north, those are ones that would really favor an earlier peak. And earlier peak, of course, would be cooler than normal conditions, or presence of drought if it's a really serious drought. Again, there's other things that come into play there. Next slide. Now, the brilliance of the fall color, there's a whole lot of factors that go into this, and a little bit of the factors are basically determined in the summertime, okay? And so we kind of look over towards the left would be factors or weather conditions that would tend to inhibit color. And one big one there is drought in the summertime. So if we have a serious drought in the summer, or especially the late summer, then that can dull the colors. If we kind of move across there, persistent wetness, if we have that during the summer, that doesn't necessarily help brilliance, but it doesn't hurt it either. But the best for brilliance of the colors in the fall has to do basically, or relates to having slightly drier than normal conditions during the summertime. Then also during the summer, and typically when we have droughts this summer, we have warmer than normal temperatures. That tends to hurt the brilliance there. And really drought and warmer than normal conditions, the trees start to suffer from water stress and so forth. And so a lot of them begin to lose their leaves pretty early. And then the leaves too just turn brown and fall off. But what's ideal in the summer is to have slightly drier than normal conditions and then cooler than normal temperature conditions. What by far is the biggest factor in determining brilliance of the fall colors is the conditions in early fall. So basically the month of September and maybe the beginning of October. And so basically high brilliance would happen if you have lots of days where there's dryness and specifically days in which the sun is out quite a bit. And that's very useful for certain trees like maples. It really draws out the reds. So persistent dryness is a bigger factor. Also, and cooler than normal temperatures, but not so cold that you get an early frost. So those two conditions really favor the colors coming out a lot more. On the other hand, if you've got a drought in the summer that continues into fall, something that we saw last year, that hurts quite a bit. And certainly having warmer than normal temperatures in the fall, that can hurt a bit as well. And as I was mentioning before, in terms of the timing of the peak, the weather conditions, if you get an event with a lot of heavy rain or strong winds that can knock leaves off the trees, perhaps before they've gotten to full color, maybe they're right at full color and then they get knocked off there pretty quickly. But again, ideal conditions would be an absence, basically an absence of rain and absence of strong wind conditions. Next. Okay, so real quickly, I'm just going to show you, and you've seen these slides already presented by a few of the speakers before, but if we go back first to last summer and we look at it, temperatures were basically normal, and in some of the northern parts of the regions, somewhat above normal. And so that really didn't really have much play in terms of affecting color brilliance. Summer precipitation, as it usually is here in the southeast in summer, was quite variable, but we really, for most areas, we had no drought. And so that's something that would favor us having a more colored brilliance in the fall. Next. Okay, and so then we zoom forward to basically the last month. Again, so this is image, I think that Pam showed something very similar, but temperatures basically because of a lot of cloud cover and precipitation, temperatures were generally normal to below normal. So there's really nothing there in itself with temperature that would really control color brilliance that much. But one thing, unfortunately, is, you know, as you've seen, we've gotten a whole lot of rain and we've had a lot of cloudy days. And so as a consequence of that, a lot of areas, maybe with exception to northern parts of Virginia, that would really hurt the color brilliance somewhat. Next slide. As we move forward over the next 7 days, fortunately, we're really going to get a chance to dry out, and we're going to have, you know, depending upon where you are, 3 or 4 days of nice weather, of a lot of sunlight, and also cooler temperatures, normal, and then this weekend below normal temperatures. And so that's really going to help the colors come out somewhat more, and that's really going to move us much closer to the color peak in a lot of areas. Next. And then we go basically 6 to 10 days from now, and we're really kind of in an uncertain sort of pattern. I think there's more uncertainty than normal in terms of where the meteorologists really expect the trough and the ridge axes to be here. But basically what it looks like here is that temperatures are going to be close to normal. Precipitation, maybe a slight chance of it being above normal. But all this, I think, as we're getting in towards late October, would be that this would increase color and there would be the movement towards the color peak. And certainly in the higher elevations of North Carolina and most, especially above 5,000 feet, it's definitely going to be past that peak. And I would even put that maybe down to 4,000 feet. For example, you're driving along the Blue Ridge Parkway. And the other thing we have to watch for, and this is really in the high elevations in the southern Appalachians, the possibility of leaf fall with frost. So there's a possibility of that this weekend. It's still several days ahead. We can't say for sure, but in some areas that could end up causing leaves really to begin to fall. Next slide. And then finally, the 8 to 12 day, pretty much a similar pattern, but there's basically there's a higher chance of temperatures being above normal. Okay, precipitation, a lot of uncertainty around that. Right now, and this is going pretty far in the future, but it looks like there's a low probability of high winds or heavy rainfall, which could knock the leaves down. Next slide. Okay, so just a summary here. Basically, near normal timing this year and color brilliance. So there's not really strong factors working one way or the other. It has been wet and that works against color brilliance, but according to a few experts, it looks like the colors are at least going to be close to normal. One thing is the timing appears to be earlier this year than prior years, but this just really has a lot to do with the fact that more of the recent years, it's been exceptionally warm, especially last year when we had the drought and we had temperatures in a few places in the Piedmont and the coastal plain that got up over 100 degrees. So we're much cooler this year. So anyway, it appears that the timing's going to be somewhat closer to normal. And there's a possibility of increased color vibrance relative to recent years. Again, maybe nothing to brag about, but perhaps better than last year's. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. My name is Meredith Muth. I am a regional coordinator for the National Integrated Drought Information System, one of the co-organizers of this webinar series with NOAA's National Weather Service and the Southeast Regional Climate Center. Many thanks to all of our wonderful speakers. In particular, getting a little bit of a better understanding on the processes that go into impacting our fall foliage is very timely. If you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and enter them into the question box at this time. Our next webinar will be on November 20th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and we will have a winter outlook presentation from the Climate Prediction Center of NOAA. You can also register for upcoming webinars at the link here. There will be, as I mentioned, a short survey after this webinar is completed, please take a moment to complete those few questions. And if you have any other additional comments or suggestions, including special topics you'd like to learn more about, please don't hesitate to let us know. Oh, thank you. The webinar is on November 10th, not 20th. I will go ahead and correct that. Thank you very much, Brian, for mentioning that in the question box. And so now we're at our question and answer period. This is also a great time to answer any questions you have related to the climatology or weather of the area. We have a number of experts on the call behind the scenes ready to answer your questions if you have any. I'm not seeing any questions at this time. So once again, I'd like to thank all of our speakers, Sandra, Pam, and Chip, as well as Todd. And with that, I wish all of you a wonderful day, and we look forward to joining us next month on November 10th. Thank you.